30 days ago, I deleted ChatGPT from every device I own, and what happened next genuinely surprised me. Not because Claude was perfect, not because it solved every problem I threw at it, but because switching forced me to confront something I hadn't been honest with myself about. I had stopped thinking, I was just prompting. And somewhere in that autopilot routine, I had handed over more than just my workflow. I had handed over my judgment. This is what I found. I want to take you back to the moment I knew something had to change. It was a Tuesday afternoon, nothing dramatic. I was using ChatGPT to help me draft a detailed breakdown of a topic I knew well, something I'd spent years studying. And the response came back fast, clean, confident. Bullet points, subheadings, the kind of output that looks authoritative at a glance. Except it was wrong. Not catastrophically wrong, but subtly, confidently wrong in a way that would have slipped past anyone who didn't already know the subject. And that bothered me. Not because AI makes mistakes, every tool does, but because of how frictionless it felt, how easy it was to just accept it and move on. I started paying closer attention after that. I ran the same prompts through multiple tools. I kept notes. What I found over several weeks of informal testing was a consistent pattern. Certain AI systems are optimized for the appearance of confidence, not the reality of accuracy. They're trained in part on human feedback that rewards responses that feel satisfying, responses that are polished, decisive, well-formatted. The problem is that satisfying and correct are not the same thing, and once you start seeing that gap, you can't unsee it. Researcher Simon Willison, who has spent years documenting AI behavior and runs one of the most respected independent blogs on large language models, has written extensively about what he calls hallucination confidence, the phenomenon where models present fabricated or incorrect information with the same tone and formatting as accurate information. There's no signal, no hesitation, no flag, just the same smooth delivery whether the model is right or completely fabricating. He's not alone in raising this concern. The Stanford Center for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence published findings in 2024, noting that user trust in AI outputs tends to increase with response fluency, meaning the better it sounds, the more people trust it, independent of whether it's actually accurate. Think about what that means for you. If you're using these tools for research, for decisions, for anything that actually matters, you may have been grading them on presentation when you should have been grading them on truth. That's what sent me toward Claude. Not hype, not a sponsorship. I started seeing it mentioned in forums and research communities, not by casual tech enthusiasts, but by people who work with language models professionally, writers, researchers, developers. The consistent observation wasn't that Claude was faster or shinier. It was that Claude pushed back, that it said, "I'm not certain about this," when it wasn't certain, that it flagged its own limitations. That felt different enough to be worth 30 days of my life. Now, before we go further, let's talk about what's actually happening behind the scenes. Because this isn't just about which chatbot gives better answers. This is about the business model underneath these tools, and understanding that changes how you use them. Here's what most people don't realize about how these AI companies actually make money off your conversations. OpenAI, Google, Meta, these are not neutral research institutions. They are products companies. And when their AI tools are free or nearly free, you are, in some meaningful sense, part of the product pipeline. Your prompts, your use patterns, your feedback, all of that feeds model improvement, which feeds competitive positioning, which feeds enterprise contracts and API licensing worth billions. This isn't conspiracy thinking. OpenAI's own terms of service have historically allowed them to use conversations for training purposes unless you specifically opt out. And even then, the scope of what's retained has been debated by privacy researchers. The Electronic Frontier Foundation flagged concerns as early as 2023 about the lack of transparency in how major AI labs handle user data, noting that most users have no practical visibility into what's stored, for how long, or how it's used. Anthropic, the company behind Claude, is not perfect, and I'm not here to tell you they are. They are also a commercial entity with investors and revenue goals, but they have been more explicit about their approach in a few ways worth noting. Their published model card and constitutional AI framework, which is publicly available, outlines a training approach designed to make the model helpful, harmless, and honest. More importantly, they've been relatively transparent about what Claude will and won't do and why. That transparency, whether or not you agree with every decision it produces, reflects a different philosophy about the user relationship. You're being treated as someone who deserves an explanation, not just an output. It's like the difference between a contractor who hands you a finished product and walks away, and one who shows you what they built, explains the decisions they made, and tells you where the limitations are. Both might do good work, but one of them respects that it's your house. So, day one. I opened Claude for the first time as my primary tool, and I want to walk you through exactly what I noticed. Because the first thing that struck me wasn't capability, it was texture. The responses felt different in a way I struggled to articulate at first. Less like a search engine that learned to write paragraphs, more like a conversation with someone who was actually tracking the thread of what I was trying to accomplish. I asked it to help me work through a complex argument I was developing, something with multiple moving parts, competing considerations, a genuine tension I hadn't resolved. Instead of collapsing it into a clean answer, Claude held the tension. It mapped out why the question was hard. It offered framings without forcing a conclusion. That was new. By week 2, I was stress testing it deliberately. I gave it ambiguous prompts to see how it handled uncertainty. I pushed it on topics where I suspected it might be on shaky factual ground. What I found was that Claude hedges honestly. When it doesn't know something with confidence, it says so. When a question is genuinely contested, it presents that contest rather than arbitrarily picking a side and presenting it as settled. Now, full disclosure, this can occasionally feel frustrating if you want a fast, definitive answer. There were moments I wished it would just commit, but I came to understand that frustration as my own conditioning. I had been trained by other tools to expect false confidence, and I'd started mistaking that confidence for quality. Week 3 is when I started using Claude for longer, more complex projects. Multi-stage research, extended writing, iterative problem solving across multiple sessions. This is where I noticed the most meaningful difference. Claude has a substantially larger context window than most of its competitors, which in plain language means it can hold more of a conversation in mind at once. If you're working on something that builds over dozens of exchanges, a long document, a detailed plan, a research project, that matters enormously. I wasn't re-explaining context every few messages. The thread stayed coherent, the work accumulated rather than resetting. I also want to mention something that doesn't get talked about enough: how Claude handles sensitive or ethically complex topics. I work across a range of content areas, and some of them bump into edge cases, things that require nuance, that have legitimate and illegitimate uses, that require a tool to actually reason about context rather than pattern match to a refusal. Claude gets this wrong sometimes. It's occasionally overcautious in ways that are genuinely annoying. But when it errs, it usually explains why, and often when you provide more context, it adjusts. It treats you as a reasoning adult who might have a legitimate reason for asking a complicated question. That's not universal in this space. By the end of day 30, here's where I landed. Claude is not the right tool for everything. If you want speed above all else, if you're running high-volume simple tasks, if you need deep real-time web integration, there are use cases where other tools have edges. I'm not asking you to delete every other AI tool you use. What I am saying is this: if you're doing serious work, writing, research, analysis, anything where accuracy and nuance actually matter, Claude deserves a serious look, not as a novelty, but as a primary tool. One more thing worth knowing: Claude offers a free tier, so the barrier to running your own 30-day test is essentially zero. And the paid tier, Claude Pro, is competitive in pricing with ChatGPT Plus. There's no financial reason to not try it, which means the only question is whether you're curious enough to find out for yourself. Here's what 30 days taught me that no benchmark test or tech review ever could. The AI tool you use shapes how you think, not in some abstract, scary science fiction way, in a very practical, daily way. A tool that rewards you for not questioning it will gradually teach you not to question it. A tool that models intellectual honesty, that says, "I'm not sure," that holds complexity without collapsing it, that treats you as a participant rather than a passive recipient, will, over time, make you a sharper thinker. Not because the AI is thinking for you, but because it's modeling a standard of engagement that you start to internalize. That's the thing I didn't expect to find in 30 days. I expected to find a better chatbot. What I actually found was a mirror. The tool I use reflects the kind of thinking I'm willing to accept. And once I saw that clearly, going back to comfortable but overconfident felt like a step backward. You don't have to take my word for it. 30 days, free tier, your own workflow. See what you find. Because this isn't about brand loyalty to an AI company. It's about whether the tools you use every day are making you better or just making you faster. Those are not the same thing. If this breakdown was useful, subscribe. I cover AI tools, workflows, and the stuff underneath the surface that most tech channels skip. And drop a comment. Are you already using Claude, still on ChatGPT, or running something else entirely? I read everyone. See you in the next one.